I would like to welcome Dr. Dea Marx with us today. I'm going to ask her to introduce herself briefly, and then we're going to have a chat about um, imposter syndrome and writing and resistance and some other good stuff. So Dee, would you introduce yourself, your role, and tell us a little bit about your role at UMKC now, and maybe why you decided to pursue the EDD when you did.
Okay. I am currently the program director for ProRUS, which stands for Professional Readiness Opportunity for RUS. So I work with student employees on workplace skills and professionalism and leadership skills and things that will be helpful once they're outside the university and working in the real world, as people call it. So I came to the university 10 years ago and was working in the School of Ed after working in the K-12 system as both a teacher and a principal. And learning about the higher ed culture, I also realized that people don't take you really seriously unless you have a doctorate degree. So that was kind of my first look at whether I really wanted a doctorate or not. In the K-12 world, it isn't necessary. It's not even something somebody talks to you about, but that was very different when I moved into the higher ed and the culture that surrounds higher ed.
I muted myself. At the beginning of the program, how confident did you feel about your writing ability and about your ability to succeed in the program?
So at the very beginning of the EDD, I think I was probably as insecure and unsure as I could get. Writing had never been anything I did for pleasure. I wrote a lot for practitioners, not for publication, but just as a principal. I wrote handbooks and I wrote letters home to parents, and I wrote a lot of curriculum for teachers, but nothing ever formal. It was all just, what do we need in the field? I was very boots on the ground, very centered at how do I serve my students, that type of thing. So writing for publication and writing scholarly material wasn't part of my professional life. When I came to UMKC and just in my working with my job duties that were assigned, I needed things and I would write them up. And one day I was in the hallway talking to Benita Buckner, who was the head of the EDD program at the time, and she asked me what I was doing. And I was like, I'm writing up a guideline for student teachers. And she's like, oh, well, I'm part of this group that's putting together a book. You should do a chapter in a book. And I was like, are you crazy? No. She said, yeah, you should think about it. I'm like, no. So 2 days later, she sent me an email going, here's the call for the book, and here's what I think you should do with your part. And I was like, Benita, I have never written anything for publication. She goes, you can do it. She goes, just send it to me, I'll help you. And so through that series, I had this little, and it is a little, chapter in this book that got published. And I was like, holy moly, terrified the whole way. When it came and here it is all published, I was just like, ooh, look at me, but it still didn't make me confident because that was very practitioner based. It was very much a, you do step A, B, and C if you want the result of this. So as I started in my doctoral program, I knew I could do the academic work. That never bothered me. But writing the dissertation, it was like, holy moly. And we talked about imposter syndrome. And, when you come from a different professional life and you come back to higher ed, because I had been in K-12 for 20 years. I was older than everybody. I had been outside of the university for a really long time. Being a professor probably wasn't my life goal, although I loved to teach. So it was kind of a different situation coming in, and I happened to connect with a couple people right away that were excellent writers, and that just made it worse because then I was like, oh my word, you know. Um, but I wanted the degree bad enough that it was worth working on the other stuff. And there were so many things looking back now that were like stair steps that by the time I got to the dissertation, it was still terrifying, but it was doable, you know, and you could break it down into steps of, okay, I need this, and I could figure out how to make that. So did that answer your question?
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay,
you
good.
know, I love that because when I was writing my dissertation, I used to call it my big paper, because if I called it my dissertation, I would be intimidated by it. But I just would tell myself, I've written long papers before. Like I had to
Right.
write a 20-page paper before, so I'll just call this my big paper. And then it sort of like didn't have the same, didn't get to have the same power in my life when I got to call it something smaller than a dissertation. So yeah, breaking it down to those small parts, that makes a lot of sense for sure. I also like, excuse me, I had similar experience when I went to my master's program, because I had been in fashion merchandising and then had been in college athletics when I went to my master's program, and I was the second oldest in my cohort, and had been in a applied program, so I didn't have a lot of writing experience. And I remember being like, what, do I have to write papers in this program? Because I didn't have to write papers. I did projects, and feeling like, I hope I know how to write a paragraph, and sort of being like, this is going to be a learning curve. So you mentioned that being friends with good writers in some ways caused your confidence to suffer, you know, by contrast. When you look back, you talked a little bit about how you made things more manageable. What do you think helped your confidence grow? Or what experiences, like working with Dr. Butner, helped your confidence level to change?
I think every time I turned a paper in and got some feedback of, oh, this section was really good, or, oh, I never thought of that. That's a great way to look at it. Or just something where there was some positive feedback was really helpful. I think the thing that got me through consistently the most was I made a small group of friends, and we met once a month, and we sought out people who could teach us things. Like if we were struggling in one area, we would find a professor or a staff member or somebody who had some experience in that area, and we just got together for lunch and sat down and talked about it. And we were really open with what was going on in our lives and what was terrifying and what class was amazing and what class was driving us crazy. And having that core group, that when you hit a place where you're like, man, I don't think I can do this. The semester I took 3 classes at the same time and was working full time, I was pretty sure I was going to die, you know. And those were the people that would send me an email that said, hey, I read this article, it might fit with your paper, or just an email that said, hey, hang in there. Or I saw you walk across campus, waved at you, you were, you know, in your own little world, but I wanted to say hi. You know, anything that was encouraging, that was really helpful. So that was one of the things I really liked about my EDD program, is we had a cohort model. So I would see the same people every week.
Yeah.
And the simple things like standing in the parking lot after class and just talking, and, or, you know, just knowing that you're going to be with the same people for the whole semester and you get to see those same people, that was really helpful too. I'm a big people person. So building in those things of where if we had a chance to pick our own small group, we knew it was going to be this core of 3 or 4 women that would get together and do it, because we were really good at supporting each other.
Yeah, great. I'm going to switch us back to gallery view, because I think the next couple questions we might have more conversation as we move out of strict interview process. But so you've been out of the program for about a year, and you've been active in the School of Education writing group Since then, you've collaborated on a few articles, you've been the lead author on a couple papers as well, and you're working on a couple papers from your dissertation right now. So you're pretty active as a scholar and a scholar practitioner. We talked about this a little bit before the interview started, and this isn't on my list, but I'm going to ask you this now for the recording. Before you started the program, did you think to yourself, oh, you know what, I'm totally going to be a scholar practitioner later? Like, I'm totally going to be writing articles and publishing in places and doing that kind of research. Was that how you saw yourself, or is that a new part of your identity that's come since then?
I would say it started in probably my second year of the program. So a lot of people ask you what you want to do with your doctorate. You know, do you want to teach? Do you want to be a professor? Do you want to stay a practitioner? And truly, I always said I could go either way. If I could teach full time, that would be amazing. If I was a program director or something like that, that would be great. I have a pretty wide, versatile skill base, so I'm comfortable doing a lot of different things, and I like to try new things. So I'm always open for what comes along. But about the second year, we had an informal mentor that said, hey, you guys have this similar interest. You should present at a conference. That'd be a good experience for you. And we were like, hey, we like to talk. Sure, we'll do it. And in the process, you write a proposal. And so then afterwards, she's like, well, why don't you try turning that into an article? Mm-hmm. And so one of the young ladies that was in the program was very much in the mindset that she wanted to be a full professor someday. That's her goal. And so she's like, okay, I'm going to write this article. You should write it with me. And so through those 2 or 3 experiences, it was like, oh, this is kind of cool being able to, you know, present something that's never been out there before. And so as we went through those experiences and got through several national conferences, and I really liked those experiences, it was like, okay, maybe this is something I really could do. And then when we published our first article, it was like, okay, I see how this goes. And then the other thing is in writing group, watching the process from seasoned professors and professionals, and just watching the ideas develop and be mulled over and refined and changed, and, you know, getting to see the same piece of writing come back multiple times. And knowing that people who have done this for 10 years still kind of struggle with the process, that was kind of fascinating to me. And I was like, okay, that could be something that I would enjoy. Mm-hmm. There's parts of the writing process that I love, and there's parts that even now I still don't care for as much. But being able to say, this is a new idea and this is something that I developed, is really enticing. Mm-hmm. And whether that's creating a curriculum or creating an article, you know, having that be contributing to your field is really what motivates me. Yeah. So yeah, there was lots of things along the line that helped me develop that. It started way back before I started the program, and then the writing experiences, the writing group, getting to be with a couple other people who were really excited about writing helped. Yeah.
I like that. Similarly, I was applying for a summer grant. I didn't think I wanted to be a faculty person. I thought I wanted to go back into practitioner land, because I like working with students and FaceTime with students. But I was working on a summer grant proposal and using a data set out of the University of California. And my advisor said, well, if you're applying to use that data set, are you going to apply to present at the conference for that data set? And I was like, I guess so. And she was like, okay, go ahead, do it. Okay. So then I wrote up my little proposal and it got accepted and I was like, okay. And then the presentation was actually occurred before I even was supposed to start the summer grant. Like the conference happened in May and the summer didn't even start till June for the grant, like the research grant. So I was like, on the bright side, I guess my research is done before
There
I
you
got
go.
the money for it. But that ended up being one of my first published papers, was the paper from that thing. And it definitely, her encouragement to do that made a big difference, starting with just why don't you just present that at a conference? You know, there, I agree that that encouragement sort of gives you that little taste. You know, it's like your first hint of candy. Oh,
And
sure.
it's amazing when somebody reads what you're working on and they go, oh, you know what, your research is really important. You know,
Yeah.
you need to get this published. You need to get this out there. And it's like, really? Wow.
Or let's
Okay.
talk more about this. And you're like, let's talk more about it.
That's right. That's
Um,
right.
so you've been doing this now for a while. Do you still experience, do you ever experience resistance in your writing?
Yes.
What kind of
Um,
resistance?
my biggest struggle is because my position is not one that has writing as part of it, is really finding the time, you know, because when I put in a 40, 50, 60-hour week, depending on what the week looks like, to sit down on a Saturday afternoon or Sunday night and go, okay, let's write, you know, for scholarship. Um, it's, that makes it difficult.
Mm-hmm.
But there's been projects that I've had started in various forms of being finished, that it's like, okay, I can't have this on my plate for, you know, the next 5 years. I need to get it done.
Yeah.
And in the process of doing that, it's like, oh, but here's this next little project that could be really exciting. And this past year, it was our first full year in a brand new program. So that was my real job. And I had 4 different articles in different stages of completion. I about drove myself nuts because it was just like, this is crazy. But yet, all of them were with other people. So I didn't want to let them down.
Yeah.
And they were very understanding when my job would get crazy. But just seeing them go through the different stages and, you know, getting closer to completion was also really exciting. The hardest part is when you don't have, like, some articles, there's a call and the deadline for the call is, you know, 3 months from now. So you have a deadline and you have to get everything done. Those are easy for me. Whereas if you just have this great idea and there's no deadline and you can just submit it whenever you get done, those seem to drag on for me. The nice thing is those are your ideas and you really get to develop them and decide where they go rather than writing for one specific call. So there's good and bad for both, and the motivation is what really has to drive what you're doing. For me, getting to work with other people is a real bonus, and so that's what drives a lot of my writing.
Yeah.
Like, I thought I was done and I was going to take the summer off and just kind of coast. And then somebody I really like and respect said, hey, I have this idea and you have this area of expertise. Will you write this with me? And I was like, well, I ain't saying no to that.
Well, if I can work with you.
I know.
Yeah.
Because it's like, ooh, because I know you have really great ideas and you're a really great writer. So yes, I would be happy to do that. So now I have to find time to fit that in this summer.
I've had some of those experiences where I've said, well, I don't have time to add any new papers. And then there's the person that I, like, my very favorite writing partner is like, hey, but what about this thing? And I'm like, oh, well, I mean, obviously I have time for you.
Yeah.
You know, I feel like even though my job is supposed to be writing, I think I run into time crunches with writing too. I tell my students a lot that there will always be other things to do besides write. When it gets to the dissertation stage and in fact, some of my advisees, you had Dr. Maher as your advisor, but some of my advisees later in this interview series might say it. But we talk about resistance to writing, and I say, the universe is headed towards entropy all the time. And so anytime we try to do something creative and try to create something, everything in the universe is working against that creative endeavor and trying to crush it. And so anytime we are trying to move forward on a creative endeavor, it just feels like the entire universe is saying, don't you have these other 5 activities to do? Didn't that pipe just burst? Are your children screaming at you? Did the school nurse just call? You get an urgent email from whoever that you report, like just all of a sudden, the instant you schedule, in fact, one of my colleagues said that she put on her calendar writing time. Like, so she's blocked out her calendar for writing time. She's a faculty member like me, so writing is a part of her job. She put writing time on her calendar, and then she sent her calendar for a campus committee. So they were all supposed to send their availability to say when they were available to meet, and they scheduled it during her writing time. And we just laughed because, like, of course they did, because the universe is geared towards entropy, and no matter what you do, it's like you have to do it in secret. Like, you have to say, like, this is my bean counting time, and then you can like secretly write. And so I know for time, it's really always hard to find that time to write. And 30 minutes a day is a good way to do that. Finding a Sunday night or whatever time figuring out what time you write best, and then finding a way to make it enjoyable for you is a good time to do that. I know for me, sometimes I have a hard time writing because I'm just bored with it. Like, I really like the newness of the beginning of a project. It sounds like you do too, like the new idea and the new concept and getting it started. And then I get kind of slogged down in the middle, like, now I have to like find the citations and make it sound good and write a conclusion and incorporate people's feedback, and all that is like blah. That's why I like writing with co-authors. I'm like, who wants to incorporate this feedback? Anyone? I'm the idea person. But I think there's also too imposter syndrome. So we're going to transition to thinking about imposter syndrome, because sometimes the reason I don't want to write, I chalk it up to things like I don't have time, or I can't find citations, or I don't understand what this person's feedback is. But really what it is I don't know if I'm good enough to write this paper, or I don't know if I know enough to write this paper. Do you ever experience that imposter syndrome?
I have a perfect example. So during my doctorate program, we did a very informal mentoring program that we later developed into this really cool concept on how to access mentoring when nobody has time to mentor you.
It's a cool concept.
Yeah. So we wanted to write it up, and I have a co-author on it, and we had a general outline of the article, and I would sit down and open it up, and I was like, okay, I'm going to write my 30 minutes today on this. And I would just stare at it. And I'm like, oh, what if people think this is dumb? What if I can't communicate what it is, or how do I communicate? It's something we did. I mean, I ate, drank, breathed. I knew it was successful, and I just couldn't write. Like, there was no words, and I would just get this blank, and it's like, oh my word. And it's like, okay, well, I'll answer an email. And I go answer an email that led to like the 15 emails. And then it was like, oh, I don't have time to write anymore. And there were times that I literally would say, I can't think about it. And I would put it off, or my job would get really busy and I'd use that excuse. And a lot of it was my ego. It was like, what if I put this out here and everybody thinks it's ridiculous, and yet I knew it had value. And so I had to really get to the point where I was like, you know what, get your ego out of the way. You've made a commitment to write it. Just start doing it.
Yeah.
And that's when I really kind of learned the value of chunking it, because when I thought about the whole thing, it would just get really overwhelming. And when I thought about sending it to the publisher, it would get ridiculously overwhelming. You know, it's like, okay, don't worry about that. We know that our findings were X, Y, and Z, you know, and I do just that. The other thing that helped was writing group, because, you know, you have to sign up to bring your writing every once in a while. And so I would know that in 4 weeks was going to be my time. I had to take something. So I would at least get 6 pages that were semi-decent to take to writing group. And then, of course, you get all that feedback, and then you have to go back and do something with it. So, you know, that's another, it's like you walk away and you're like, okay, they just ripped my heart out. And it's like, what do I even, can I even fix it so it's going to be okay? You know, so you have this roller coaster with your writing, you know, and yet there's some days I sit down and it's like I start writing, and then pretty soon I'm like, holy moly, where did that hour go? I mean, it just flew by. And it was like, man, I got, you know, 3 good paragraphs, or I got a great outline, or, you know, I found 4 articles, or whatever it was that I did in that time. And it's a really enjoyable experience. So, yeah, even now when I'm really writing about stuff I know about, and I really know I know more than other people, there's still some insecurity there, because, you know, your writing is your thoughts, your words, and
very vulnerable.
Yeah.
Yeah. I even just today I was meeting with someone who I don't know very well on campus, and asked me to be a part of a project. He's expert in one area, but not an expert in college students. And he's recruiting me to be on this project so we can work together to think about college student anxiety and well-being. And so that's why I'm on this project. And even in that, I was like, so we could maybe do this thing. We could do this. Yeah. He's like, okay, great. And afterwards I said to my husband, I have to remember that I'm the expert in this partnership. That is my area of expertise, and it's okay to be the expert in that moment, and that I don't have to be shy about being the expert or embarrassed about being the expert. And I sometimes I liken it to walking into a room or to going into a doorway and leaning on the door instead of walking all the way into the room and owning the room. And I used to say to people, how we enter in someone's office is indicative of how we're feeling about our confidence and how we're feeling about ourselves in that moment, right? Like if we go to our boss's office and we sort of lean against the door and we're like, hey, right?
You have a minute for me?
Right. Versus like walking in and just saying like, hey, I had a question for you. And standing tall and owning our role and our ability to be in that space, that we are peers. And sometimes we have to remember that in the doctoral process, we are becoming peers with everyone else who has a doctorate, that we are earning the qualification that allows us to stand confidently in their office side by side and say, I have an opinion and expertise too. It's really hard.
That was probably one of the strangest processes.
Yeah.
So I came into higher ed as an expert in K-12.
Yeah.
I mean, I ran a school. I made major decisions. I did budgets. I fired people. I hired people. You know, I was in charge. And then you come to higher ed and it's like, oh, no, you're nothing because you don't have a doctorate. You don't have an opinion, you know.
And it's like,
yeah. And at the beginning of the doctorate program, Dr. Butner talked about how you guys don't know anything. Like, really, you don't know anything. So you can't write that the sky is blue unless you cite it, because you have to gain your expertise and your ability to say things through other people's research. Yeah. And so that was really ingrained at the beginning, is like you had to cite everything. And there was no place in any of your papers that you could just say, well, I think this, and then at the end of my dissertation, Dr. Marhurst going, you're the expert on this, state your opinion, use the word I, this is my results, and I'm like, ooh, that felt really uncomfortable, and then it wasn't at my dissertation events, but someone else's that I attended, and I actually heard somebody say, oh, now that you have defended, you can call me by my first name. And I went, what? Wow. But in higher ed, there's that transition between pre-doctorate, postdoc, and it's very different. And I've watched people introduce me with my title on purpose. To get, especially if I'm speaking to faculty, whoever's introducing me definitely makes sure to say, this is Dr. Marx instead of just D Marx. Because it means something. It's a symbol.
Well, and I think that there's an implied expertise, there's an implied expertise in the honorific, but it's an earned expertise, Steve. And but the problem is, and I think this is the challenge of imposter syndrome for all of us, is that others recognize when my students or my colleagues meet me. I'm in the habit of introducing myself as Dr. Riggers Peel. It took me a little while to get in the habit of it, but now I just do it because I think more people need to understand that women can have doctorates. And so I introduce myself that way. It gives me more credibility, right, with other people, and I know that. But when other people meet me, I know that they assume I'm an expert in whatever, for the most part. But I have a much more difficult time remembering that I'm the expert myself. And I think that that's true for many of us, that we forget that we have our own expertise. We forget that we have done this research, that we have read the articles. It's true, when you've done the dissertation work, you become the expert in that topic, and you are the person, the go-to person. And so it's really important that we take that expertise into our writing and not let it cripple us as we move forward. But I think it's also important to remember, and you've really touched on this nicely, I think, in this conversation, to remember that it doesn't just end, that those feelings of insecurity or uncertainty don't end the day they hand you your diploma, or that you walk across the stage, or that they say, congratulations, Dr. Marx, you've passed your defense. That those experiences creep up on us in the moments we least expect it. And that it does sometimes mean you're staring at your paper going, what do I do? So just as you kind of mentioned chunking as one way to overcome that imposter syndrome, breaking it down into little bits. One of the things I do is I try not to end my writing at the end of a paragraph. So I try to, if I'm writing something new, I try to end in the middle of a paragraph or the middle of a section so that I can jump in more easily. My thoughts maybe are still going versus feeling like I have to start from scratch somewhere, which feels more intimidating. I still get intimidated by feedback from my colleagues. So sometimes I ask for help from them, or sometimes I'm actually thinking about this on this one paper I'm stuck on, thinking about asking one of them to co-author with me, just so that they will take over the theoretical framework part, because they want me to change my whole framework to something I don't understand. So do you have any other final words about imposter syndrome or confidence, or letting other people hear your writing? We didn't talk about that as much, but I don't want us to go too long. Any other words of encouragement for the new EDD cohort?
I think two. One has to do specifically with writing. One thing that I started doing so I wouldn't get stuck is, those editing bubbles when you're editing somebody else's paper, you can add a comment. I always put in there what my next thought's going to be. So I will say, start here, and I date it so I don't forget.
Nice.
And then I say, continue this paragraph or continue this thought with blah, 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 blah. So it's kind of a lead in. Because what I found was if I get busy and it's 2 or 3 days, then when I get back to it, I'm like, I don't even know where I was or where I'm going to start. And then I'll be rereading paragraphs I've already edited. And it's like, oh yeah, now I remember that I already did it. So if I leave myself just a note and then I keep a running total of, not total, but like a running sheet of what projects I'm actually writing on, or if I need to check on, so that I have just a quick hard copy sheet that says, okay, today when you have 25 minutes, this is what you can do. My other thing is knowing if you put yourself in situations where you hear others talk about their writing, whether that's a formal writing group or going to lunch with people who do a lot of writing, you'll see experiences that they share as encouraging. Like we did a writing day down at the Dioceles house, and we were just sitting around at lunch, and I was with 2 professors that I didn't know really well, but they had been professors like 10 years. These were seasoned veterans. And they said, yeah, the hardest thing is when you get that rejection letter, and one of them said, I just open it. If I see the word reject, I just close it, stick it in a drawer, and I let it sit there for a week. And I just ignore it. And I was like, oh, wow. And the fact that they had been writing for probably 12 to 15 years, and they had published, 20 articles, and they still got rejected. I was just like in awe of that. I was like, oh, wow. And it still got to them, It was like, okay, so all of us will have those experiences, and all of us just persevere. And if it's something you need to change, you change it, you resubmit, you go on. Maybe it's not a good fit to that journal, you submit to another journal. Maybe you do ask for help, when you get into things where it's like, I just don't know how to frame this or how to write it or how to talk about it. Asking other people for help is a great thing. I've learned amazing things from other people, but I've also had to learn to say, okay, that's your opinion, but that doesn't fit with what I'm writing.
Yeah.
And so you have to kind of know, you can't just let other people run your writing, but you do have to know how to take that constructive feedback and use it in a way to make your writing better. I co-authored an article with another gentleman, and we submitted, it was a call for a specific thing that we were both really experts in, submitted what we thought was a great article, and they came back with, you know what, could you go in a different direction with this? We're really looking for something like this. And we were both like, okay. And we went that direction, and it turned into a completely different piece than what we were thinking at the beginning, but it was good and it served a purpose, and it's in a practitioner's journal now. So sometimes that feedback takes you in places where you wouldn't have gone before, which you should be open to. But also we saved that original piece and we may do something else with it because it was a good piece. So you just have to go with the flow a lot of the time.
Yeah.
But
that's great. Well, thank you so much for your time today and for sharing your insights and experiences with the new cohort. I really appreciate you, Dr. Marx.
Well, you're very welcome. And I encourage everybody at the start of the doctorate program, it's going to be difficult and hard, and you feel all kinds of different things, but just build your own community and know that you can get through it. You have to do the work. You have to take the feedback. But in the end, if that's what you want, it is well worth it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'll see you soon.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.